I watch a true crime show called Evil Lives Here, which features interviews with people who have lived with criminals, usually murderers, before or during the commission of their crimes. The interviewees are often family members, such as a child, a parent, a sibling, or a spouse. And one pattern I've noticed throughout the series is how frequently religion plays a significant role in the criminal's pathology. In episodes about controlling fathers abusing their children, for example, it's striking how often God is invoked as a pretext for their abusive behavior. For example, I watched an episode a few nights ago about a man named Robert Allen Hale, aka Papa Pilgrim, who physically and sexually abused his wife and kids in the Alaskan wilderness, all while claiming that God spoke through him and that everything he did was in line with Scripture. And even after being caught and urged on his deathbed by his sons to repent for his sins, he maintained that he was a godly man and that everything he did was in accordance with God's will. Now, the day after I watched that episode, I was listening to an audiobook recording of Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, and it struck me just how much of the book Nietzsche sees fit to devote to how superior he is to every other philosopher that came before him. I mean, to hear Nietzsche tell it, Kant was a moron who'd need luck on his side to tell the difference between his ass and a hole in the ground. Schopenhauer was like a dunce cap wearing buffoon. And don't even get Nietzsche started on Voltaire, all right? And this has always been kind of a challenging aspect of reading Nietzsche for me. As much as I admire the man, it feels as though he provides a pound of smugness for every ounce of philosophy. And I started to draw a parallel between Nietzsche and Papa Pilgrim. While Nietzsche's work didn't really result in the sort of direct personal harm that Papa Pilgrim inflicted on his poor family, both men nonetheless reflect a deep-seated human impulse to claim authority over others through a constructed framework, be it divine or intellectual or otherwise. Nietzsche didn't just critique the masses. He categorized them as fundamentally different and lesser than exceptional individuals capable of transcending conventional morality. And while Nietzsche never went so far as to outright label himself as the Ubermensch, the Superman, it was clear from his writings that he viewed himself as uniquely positioned to identify and articulate the qualities of such a transcendent figure. And his tone and rhetoric often carried the implication that he stood far above those that he critiqued, from Plato to Kant and beyond. Nietzsche's brilliant mind scoured the terrain of history, and he found in it no equal. So I started to wonder, what are the main differences that exist between a religious man claiming that he's a vessel of God upon this earth, and that all he does meets with God's approval, versus a philosopher who views himself as the pinnacle of thought, and thus as representative of the closest that any human being has yet come to the truth? But we can broaden the scope of this a bit, can't we? It's not as if Nietzsche and Papa Pilgrim are the only two men in all of history to create a social hierarchy and then place themselves on top of it. Look at our current American political paradigm. We are for the people, say the leftists, and all the others are fascists. We are for the people, says the liberal, and all the others are lunatics. We are for the people, says the MAGA movement, and all the others are communists. And if you zero in on a speaker-by-speaker basis, you'll often see that the individual speaker holds themselves to be the highest or among the highest within their group. They basically create an entire subcategory or enforce an entire subcategory that rises above others, and then they place themselves at near the pinnacle of that category. So they position themselves as the best of the best. Who else does that? Rappers, of course. Hence the prevalence of the diss track. Tear down your contemporaries to make yourself look bigger. You've got more skills, more wealth, more bling, superior authenticity, whatever the case may be. Or YouTubers, hey, how much time and energy on this platform is spent on YouTubers tearing down other YouTubers, always with the implicit statement that they are superior. They possess stronger abilities. They have cultivated a better audience. They are morally, physically, and intellectually superior. Religion, philosophy, art, politics, all these domains that purport to offer profound insight into the human soul and the human condition are replete with instances of individuals co-opting their structures to elevate themselves above their peers. These pursuits, ostensibly aimed at understanding or improving humanity, often become platforms for megalomaniacal narcissists to critique others while aggrandizing their own egos, transforming vehicles of enlightenment into tools of self-centered validation. Everybody, validate me. So the other night, I was hungry, and I decided I'd go through the McDonald's drive-thru and eat some food that I knew was terrible for me, right? I ordered a Big Mac. I do like this, but really it's like this. And I ordered some fries, and I ordered a large chocolate shake. Now, I didn't want anyone to witness me eating this garbage, so I parked in the McDonald's parking lot to enjoy my McFeast in Valhalla. And this particular McDonald's sits atop a big hill. And from the vantage point of the spot I chose, I could look down upon a busy intersection of the town, and I saw laid before me a great number of small and large businesses occupying their little box-shaped buildings devoid of any sort of aesthetic beauty. I could see people scurrying about in their little cars, which are also little boxes, also devoid of aesthetic beauty. And a sense of disgust started welling up inside of me. And once, not very long ago, I dreamed of being king of this world. But as I looked down upon the sight before me that night, I was kind of grateful that I'm not king. Because what wretched being would wish in earnest to preside over this pestilence? I feel the same when I think of Nietzsche, who used his considerable intellect to revel in his superiority to insects, as if this was some great accomplishment. What a pathetic man ultimately he was. No wonder he lost his mind and spent the last decade of his life as an invalid who could barely mutter a sentence. He took pride in his ability to deconstruct reality in his search for truth. But when he saw what it truly is for reality to be wholly deconstructed, with all of his intellectual might, Mr. Ubermensch was powerless to put it all back together again. It was his heuristic Humpty Dumpty, his final lesson. The world doesn't care if you're the greatest philosopher to ever live. It won't spare you the ignobility of its cruelest machinations. It won't show you the least little sliver of mercy, nor hesitate for a moment to strip away all that you have and make your life as a bleak little shell of yourself, all for its dark amusement. God is dead, said Nietzsche. Well, Nietzsche is dead, replied God. And I sat atop that hill, looking down upon humanity in disgust. But though I was elevated above them physically, I could not elevate myself above them philosophically. Did I not have processed French fries in my greasy mitts? Was I not slurping down melted ice cream? Was not the front of my shirt covered in lettuce and Big Mac sauce? I was not above the fray. I was of it. I was no better than the mass of wriggling humanity that so filled me with antipathy and scorn. I was part of the fray. I was the fray. I am Fray. That is my name. That is my task. Speaking of fray, let's get into it.
The pillar of truth can crumble. I won't lie on the rubble. The tower of God is burning, but to me that ain't no trouble. All this ego death shit just annoys me. Why would I kill the thing I love? There's nothing I would put below. Put nothing above.
This is why I refer to you all as my siblings and not as my children. This is why I reject the label of guru. I cannot be above, I can only be of. No matter what level of contempt I have for the great wretched mass of humanity, I cannot exempt myself from the critique. I cannot say, I am above. I am superior. I am not. Nor was Nietzsche, nor was Papa Pilgrim, nor is Donald Trump or Kanye West or Mr. Beast or whoever. But I must follow this impulse to its very dark conclusion, mustn't I? If no human is better than another, then Martin Luther King Jr. is no better than Hitler. Mr. Rogers is no better than Jeffrey Dahmer. And that's not a very satisfying conclusion, is it? I wish I could defeat it, but I can't see how. Now, if we're all children of God, as the Bible says, then we're all wretched beings, and this world is just a test. The Bible says God made us in his image, but that's the first and last compliment it ever pays us. The rest of the book is replete with admonitions about our unworthiness. Jeremiah 17:9 warns us that the heart is deceitful above all things. Romans 3:23 tells us all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. In Isaiah, we're told that even our best efforts at goodness are shit in God's eyes. All of us have become like one who is unclean, and all of our righteous acts are like filthy rags. And if we're not children of God, which in my opinion we're not, and just primates who evolved language and technology, then there exists no barometer of our value other than ourselves. Clearly a biased source though, right? Humans are wonderful. Source, humans. There's nothing that we know of that externally validates us. The closest thing we've come up with is the idea of God. But we've already reviewed that. He's not impressed with us. He looks upon us with disgust and scorn, seeing us as unworthy of salvation unless we declare absolute and unthinking fealty to his progeny. Even if we conceive of a different God, a God that truly loves us, that sees value in us as a species, it would still merely be a construct of our human imaginations. Thus, just another example of us inflating our own egos, trying to validate ourselves because nothing else will or can. No matter what we do, no matter what skill we possess, what hierarchies we create, there remains a hideous truth that we cannot overcome. There is no true measure whereby we can declare any one of us superior to any other. Intelligence, physical strength, morality, no matter what trait you choose, the utility of such traits reveals an Ouroboros, right? A snake forever eating its own tail. Intelligence is valuable because it serves humans. And humans are valuable because they possess intelligence. You see the paradox, right? How can we assign value to a trait when the justification for its value loops back on itself? Intelligence is valuable because it benefits humans, but humans are valuable because they possess intelligence. It's circular logic that provides no grounding outside of itself, no objective anchor to justify why either humans or intelligence should matter in the cosmic scheme of things. Our hierarchies are recursive, my siblings. They create a little feedback loop, no matter what trait we select for, by the way. Humanity is the slave, forever whipping its own back and declaring itself the master. We use different whips for different occasions. God, philosophy, art, commerce, politics. But the result is always the same. An anthropocentric feedback loop, a hierarchical Mobius strip. And so the idea that Adolf Hitler is better than Martin Luther King Jr. is ultimately just an opinion. No more meaningful than the notion that chocolate ice cream is superior to roasted eggplant, or that Casablanca is a better film than Airplane. Nothing more than a subjectivity, a matter of personal preference. And if my conclusions on this are an affront to your sensibilities, let's remember that this experiment has already been run in the real world. Martin Luther King Jr. rose to prominence as a civil rights leader before he was assassinated, but Adolf Hitler took over an entire country and nearly conquered the entire world. You may not like my words, but you should be even more upset by those results. Human beings fear subjectivity to an extent, I think. This is why even though Sam Harris was the first of the new atheists whose best-selling book, The End of Faith, ushered in a new era of godlessness in the West, but his very next move was the attempt to discover a scientific basis for so-called objective morality. But it never amounted to anything more than pseudoscience. His idea was essentially that morality could be grounded in the well-being of conscious creatures, measured through objective metrics such as health, happiness, and societal flourishing. And on the surface, it sounds kind of reasonable, even noble. But you dig a little deeper and the same circular logic emerges. Why should the well-being of conscious creatures be the ultimate measure of morality? The answer, inevitably, is because humans, conscious creatures, deem it to be so. Once again, we find ourselves caught in the same anthropocentric feedback loop, arbitrating value based on our own biased perspective. Harris's attempts to construct an objective morality mirrors the broader human compulsion to escape the discomfort of subjectivity. We seek certainty and universality and absolutes because they give us a sense of order and purpose in a universe that really offers us neither. But morality, like all human constructs, art, philosophy, commerce, politics, etc., is shaped by context and culture and individual perspective. To claim otherwise is to engage in self-delusion, masking preference as principle. I'll go a step further and declare that even that which we view as objectively true or scientifically true is subject to intensive scrutiny. Factual reality is still grounded in underlying assumptions that cannot be verified. After all, we cannot prove that the universe itself is real in any ultimate sense. Every observation we make, every fact we verify is filtered through the limitations of human perception and cognition. The foundational assumption upon which all science and reason are built, that reality exists, that our senses and our instruments perceive it, and that laws of logic and mathematics are universal, none of that can be proven. They are axiomatic, accepted as a starting point because they appear to work, not because they are indisputably true. We're making observations about a system that we exist within, but we have no exoteric knowledge of the system itself. We have no overview. We are extrapolating reality on the basis of limited data gathered from within the system itself. It's like a character inside of a novel attempting to understand the rules and nature of the story while having no access to the author's intent or the boundaries of the plot or even the medium in which the story is written. The character can theorize about the world, they can identify patterns, they can construct a framework of understanding, but all such efforts are constrained by the perspective of being inside the narrative. Our observations of reality are much the same. We are bound by the constraints of time, space, and human cognition, and our understanding is necessarily filtered through these lenses. The very tools we use to measure and analyze, the scientific method, mathematical reasoning, sensory perception, all of those are products of the system we are trying to comprehend. They are not external, objective vantage points, but internal mechanisms shaped by evolution and environment. I see us, humanity, as existing in a matrix of subjectivities and possibilities, not within some objective, verifiable reality. Even if we could discover that something like morality was objectively true, there exists no assurance that the objective truth of it would at all conform to our present biases. It could turn out that the objective moral truth of the universe is repugnant to our sensibilities. Perhaps the objective moral truth of the universe is repulsively evil by our standards. What would we do then? Would we consign ourselves to obedience to a universe that in our view is evil? Or will we hold our own objective standard of good as higher, our subjective standard, but objective to us? I think we would do the latter. I think we would say, oh, the universe is evil? Well, fuck that. We will still be our idea of good. And my evidence of that is that humanity has always chosen comforting lies over harsh truths. And what does that say about us? It says that in spite of our protestations, we are rather in love with the subjective nature of so-called reality, because in the realm of subjectivity, we are gods. These ideas are rather postmodern, of course, and many particularly those on the right, claim to revile postmodernism. But there's a wonderful irony to this. When it comes to theorizing and philosophizing about postmodernism, the left has the edge. But when it comes to applying postmodernism, the right are clearly the winners. Look no further than Donald Trump's MAGA movement and its adherents. Now, they may decry postmodernism, the few of them that know the term and the even fewer who can grasp it, but they're nonetheless geniuses about the practical application of it. Think about it. They have created a worldview that flourishes not because it aligns with objective fact, but because it appeals to a deeply subjective vision of the world. Make America great again! That doesn't specify when America was great, what made it great, what defines the qualities of its greatness. It's a blank slate, a floating signifier onto which the adherents project their own personal ideals and grievances and fantasies. This is postmodernism at its finest, or perhaps its most insidious. The construction of a hyper-reality that feels truer than the truth itself. Consider the MAGA movement's approach to truth. Facts, when inconvenient, are dismissed as, fake news, fake news. And any narrative that resonates emotionally is embraced regardless of its factual basis. And while the right claims to despise the relativism and the anything goes mentality of postmodernism, they are its masters in practice. They've weaponized the very subjectivity they claim to oppose, bending reality to their will to create a narrative that is impervious to outside critique. And it's a game that the left really struggles to play, clinging, as it often does, to the Enlightenment ideals of reason and empiricism, even as the cultural battlefield has shifted to one of emotional resonance and subjective experience, aka vibes. I adore when strange things like this occur, by the way. The side that intellectually admits the veracity of postmodernism is helplessly addicted to notions of objective truth, and the side that intellectually poo-poos postmodernism utilizes it to great effect. I must admit that the human animal, for all of its perceived foibles and follies, is an entertaining creature in my eyes. If we are measured by our entertainment value, then perhaps we truly are a great race. You know, maybe I was too hard on Nietzsche earlier. Maybe he realized all of this. After all, if you look at his description of his concept of the Ubermensch, it is essentially a being who embraces the chaos and subjectivity of existence, crafting its own values in a universe devoid of inherent meaning. The Ubermensch doesn't seek refuge in objective truth or divine decree. It revels in the creative act of self-definition, unbound by the moral frameworks of the past. Nietzsche, in this sense, foresaw the dance that humanity now performs. The perpetual interplay between rejecting external authority and constructing new paradigms to live by. What's fascinating is how Nietzsche's vision aligns with the postmodern condition, even if he would likely balk at it being labeled as such. The Ubermensch is not mired in despair over the death of God or the collapse of objective truth. It sees these events as opportunities, moments of liberation. In this way, Nietzsche doesn't just predict postmodernism, he sort of transcends it, offering a way to thrive within it. The irony of our current moment is that both left and right, in their respective ways, stumble through the shadow of Nietzsche's thought. The left clings to Enlightenment ideals, longing for a universal truth that can unite and guide humanity, even as they intellectually acknowledge its absence. The right, meanwhile, instinctively embraces the Ubermensch's creative self-assertion, crafting realities that suit their purposes, but without the introspection or philosophical rigor that Nietzsche might demand. One cannot escape the conclusion that Trump himself might be the Nietzschean Ubermensch, the ultimate embodiment of a will to power unconstrained by traditional moralities or objective truths. He constructs his own reality with brazen confidence, shaping the world around him, not through adherence to facts, but by the sheer force of his personality and his ability to dominate narratives. Because Trump's appeal lies not in what he does or says, aligning with any sort of coherent ideology, but in his audacity to define truth as whatever serves his purpose in any given moment. Now, that's not to suggest that Trump fulfills Nietzsche's vision in a laudatory sense. Nietzsche's Ubermensch is a figure of profound creativity and self-mastery, someone who transcends the pettiness of herd morality to create life-affirming values, whereas Trump, in contrast, seems more like a caricature of that concept, wielding the will to power without the refinement or philosophical depths that Nietzsche probably envisioned. He represents perhaps a more primal and chaotic interpretation of the Ubermensch, one that taps into humanity's basest instincts rather than elevating it to new heights. And yet, this might make him all the more fitting for our current age. We live in a time where spectacle often trumps, no pun intended, substance, where the boldness to claim something is true outweighs any evidence to support it. In this world, Trump thrives. He is, in many ways, a reflection of the collective human psyche, a mirror held up to the postmodern condition where reality is malleable. Ooh, what do I want it to be today? And power lies in the ability to manipulate perceptions. If Nietzsche's Übermensch was meant to inspire humanity to rise above its mediocrity, Trump's ascension might instead highlight the dangers of abandoning the pursuit of truth altogether. Without introspection, without a guiding sense of purpose beyond self-interest, the will to power risks devolving into a chaotic scramble for dominance. Trump, then, is not the ideal Nietzschean figure, but rather a cautionary tale, a reminder of what the Ubermensch could become when stripped of its philosophical foundations. In this light, the ultimate irony emerges. A man who operates with no apparent knowledge of Nietzsche's work has, through his actions, provoked some of the deepest questions Nietzsche ever posed. What values should we create in a world without inherent meaning? How do we wield power responsibly when truth itself is up for grabs? And most crucially, what kind of beings do we want to become in the absence of gods or certainties or absolutes? But then perhaps the Ubermensch is little more than Nietzsche's coping mechanism, a secular messiah born in the wake of God's death. Nietzsche spoke of him in such terms when he said, "But someday, in a stronger age than this decaying, self-doubting present, he must yet come to us, the redeeming man of great love and contempt, the creative spirit whose compelling strength will not let him rest in any aloofness or any beyond, whose isolation is misunderstood by the people as if it were a flight from reality, while it is only his absorption, immersion, penetration into reality, so that when he one day emerges again into the light, he may bring home the redemption of this reality, its redemption from the curse that hitherto reigning ideal has laid upon it. The man of the future who will redeem us not only from the hitherto reigning ideal, but also from that which was bound to grow out of it. Great nausea, the will to nothingness, nihilism, this bell stroke of noon, and of the great decision that liberates the will again and restores its goal to the earth and his hope to man, this antichrist and anti-nihilist, this victor over God and nothingness. He must come one day." Sounds an awful lot like a Messiah to me. Sounds an awful lot like the prophecy of a Messiah. But what are the roots of this prophecy? Is this the result of interrogation and extrapolation, or is this merely cope? Is this just an article of faith? No different or better than the Christ myth, but a Christ born not of the divine above, but of the divine within. It seems to me that Nietzsche's Übermensch may indeed be little more than a secular reimagining of the messianic archetype, a product of human yearning for transcendence in the wake of the death of God. Stripped of divine authority and metaphysical guarantees, humanity is left with an existential void, a vast chasm of meaninglessness that Nietzsche himself recognized as nihilism. The Ubermensch, then, is his answer to the void, a figure who does not merely endure the collapse of old values, but actively creates new ones, bringing redemption not from some external source, but from within. But is this figure truly an inevitability born of reason? Or is it just a coping mechanism? Nietzsche's description, filled with yearning and almost religious fervor, betrays a deep psychological need. It reads less like cold, calculated philosophy and more like desperate hope. A vision of a future where humanity can overcome its despair and find purpose again. If so, the Ubermensch might be less a product of interrogation and extrapolation and more of a leap of faith, an act of belief in humanity's capacity for self-reinvention. This interpretation positions the Ubermensch really as no different in essence from the Christ myth. Both figures serve as answers to human suffering and nihilism, one grounded in divine transcendence and the other in human immanence. The Christ myth offers salvation through submission to a higher power. The Ubermensch offers redemption through the assertion of will and creativity, but both rely on an article of faith, the belief in something greater, be it God or be it the potential of humanity itself. If we are to be creatures of faith, and really, what else can we be, then I suppose Nietzsche was correct. God is too dead to save us, but there is at least the remotest of remote possibilities that we can save ourselves. But many questions remain in my mind, not the least of which is, what are we attempting to save ourselves from? Despair, perhaps? Nihilism, I guess? Can we navigate the subjectivities of existence to find a sweet spot of human flourishing, as Sam Harris suggested, even as we acknowledge intellectually that human flourishing is merely a biased preference and not some objective good of the universe? We could strike the attitude that all values are subjective and therefore, as the only creatures known to have opinions about such things, we are the ultimate barometer of such values by virtue of being the only barometer of such values. But it seems to me that if reality is a choose-your-own-adventure story, then we are far more likely to receive a bad ending than a good one. We are far more likely to take a wrong turn and get eaten by a monster than to find ourselves sitting upon a golden throne of self-assuredness and creative omnipotence. And yet, what choice do we really have? We can lay down and die, or we can move forward. And one thing can be said about humanity, which is that we are resilient creatures. We are no more capable of surrender to the void than we are capable of sprouting wings and flying away. If the void wants us, it's going to have to come take us. But don't take too much comfort in that, because it may. It took poor Nietzsche, but I guess it hasn't yet taken his words. It has not yet deprived us of his lessons. So today's homework assignment is to write just one single sentence. You can share it below if you wish, but you don't have to. The sentence begins with the words, God is dead, therefore. And you decide how to complete that sentence. You decide what the therefore is. And that's completely up to you. Until next time, my siblings.
If you found this sermon informative or interesting, show it some love by feeding it algorithmic engagement in the form of liking it, commenting upon it, and sharing it. A great repository of social media links, including a new Substack, can be found in the description section below. And remember, you must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star.